Today on CityCast Chicago, Northwestern's hazing scandal rocks the campus, the city tries to re-engage young people, and a Double Dutch festival is coming to South Shore. To help me break it down, I'm joined by WCIU TV host Brandon Pope and Chalkbeat Chicago reporter Mila Kumpalova. It's Friday, July 14th. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago is talking about. Good morning, Mila. Good morning, Brandon. How y'all feeling today?
Hey, doing good, man. Thanks for having me.
Good morning. Thanks for having me as well.
Hey, I appreciate y'all both making time. Mila, this is your first time on the podcast. Brandon, this is your 9th time. So I think we got a good mixture here, right? We got a newbie, we got an old head, and so we're going to have a good time.
Is that what I am, with old head?
I thought you was going to let me get it off. But
No, man. No, I'm a vet. I'm a veteran. How about that?
No, that clearly ruffled a feather right there. All right, now I know what I can do to get Brandon off his square.
These gray beards popping up, getting gray beard hairs, you know?
Before we start looking back on some critical stories from across the Chicagoland area this week, I need to bring y'all in on the conversation producer Simone Alise and I were having earlier this week, and that is about the summer movie blockbuster showdown that is less than a week away. And we are talking about, in one corner wearing the pink shorts, Barbie, versus in the other corner wearing the atomic shorts, Oppenheimer. Brandon, I want to start with you. Are you running the Barbieheimer double feature, or does one movie grab you a little bit more than the other?
Yeah, fam. I think that it's the double feature for me. You start out with a nice light brunch. You go check out Barbie. You get some drinks, and then you really settle in for Oppenheimer and the darkness and the cinema that comes with that. I can't wait for both. Both are going to be completely different films, but I'm ready for both vibes, man. It's going to be great.
I can't imagine doing both movies in the exact same day. And I'm using your words, I'm a veteran of the Ford City double feature. And by Ford City double feature, I mean you pay for one movie and you see about 2, 3, 4 movies. Hopefully nobody is listening. But those two seem like, despite the marketing placing them right next to each other, they seem like completely opposite vibes. Like, Mila, what is it looking like for you? Are you a fan of either of the marketing strategies behind sort of the Barbie bomb or the actual Oppenheimer related bomb? Which one are you looking for?
Jacoby, I'm the mom of young children. I don't know how many years it's been since I've actually gone to a movie theater. I am chronically out of the loop when it comes to movies that are coming out in the theater. I will confess that I have no idea what Oppenheimer is. Somehow I've tuned out all the buzz with that movie. I do know about Barbie, so I guess just by default I will go with that.
Probably go pull up on Barbie. Well, Oppenheimer is going to be the story of the design and creation of the atomic bomb. But I feel you. Good for you. Good for you being out of the loop enough to not get sort of swept up in the Barbieheimer mania. Luckily,
yes,
you were in the loop for the stories we're going to be talking about and breaking down today. But I'm going to start with our veteran, Brandon Pope. A huge scandal has been unfolding over the last week and a half that has to do with Northwestern's football program. Can you catch CityCast listeners on what's coming out of Evanston?
Yeah, man. How about this one? The Northwestern football program absolutely rocked by allegations of hazing within the program. There was a hazing investigation that took place really a long time ago. People kind of forgot it happened. Then a punishment came down from Northwestern to Pat Fitzgerald for these hazing allegations. It was 2 weeks. 2 weeks in the offseason, no games missed or anything like that. So some student journalists at the Daily Northwestern said, let's dig a little deeper. And they were able to talk to 11 different players who shared details about this alleged hazing. And it revealed that it was sexual in nature, that there was forced nudity, a lot of gruesome stuff. And that this is something that had been going on for years. You add that on to an independent report from Maggie Hickey, Maggie Hickey now is handling all the independent investigations, it seems like, from Madigan to this. And while the investigation showed that Pat Fitzgerald, there was not enough sufficient evidence to show that he actually knew that this was going on, there was no doubt that it was prevalent throughout the program for a number of years. So the university president says, I got to re-examine this. That 2 weeks probably wasn't enough. And then it turns out Pat Fitzgerald got fired from there. So, I
Mhm.
mean, this is really the end of a huge era in Northwestern football. You could argue that Pat Fitzgerald is the greatest figure in Northwestern athletics history. He was a player for Northwestern when they, I believe, won the Big Ten Conference the first time ever. He was an assistant coach, and then he became the head coach for 17 years, 25 years total. Pat Fitzgerald is taking legal action uh,
He is.
because of his firing. He's saying it's a breach of contract. So I'm very curious to see what happens. I'm hoping it does go to trial and that we get to see some more details of this investigation become public because the details of the investigation are not all the way public. And right now,
Hmm.
there are calls from the faculty at Northwestern to make those public, even threatening to put the $800 million stadium rebuild over in Evanston on hold until those details become public. So, this is a story that's fast moving and swirling and really came out of nowhere to a program that everyone for so long thought was just, family friendly, scotch free. Turns out
Exactly.
a lot of things happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that infuriated a lot of people is, like you said, this investigation had been going on since the fall of 2022. And then in just a 2-page sort of summary of the internal investigation, we didn't get the full scope of what had happened from Northwestern, from the investigation. To hear that this 2-week suspension was being leveled, you saw sort of immediately the gears starting to turn on people saying, is this enough? And the very next day, shout out to the student journalists at the Daily Northwestern for putting this story together, because they really made it clear that there was no way to really be a part of the Northwestern football program and not have some sense that this was going on in the background. From what I was reading, it felt like this was something that was practiced semi-openly, that there was a shorthand, there was a language for this type of hazing. And like you said, Pat Fitzgerald's future at Northwestern was pretty secure. I mean, just back in 2021, he signed a 10-year, $57 million contract to keep him there up until 2030. And so for that to be over so swift, I mean, he was fired within 3 or 4 days of this report coming out, with the Northwestern president, Michael Shields, saying the hazing we investigated was widespread and clearly not a secret within the program. So though they did not explicitly say that Fitzgerald knew anything about it, and he has denied it, it was clear that a change was going to happen. And now Fitzgerald is out.
It speaks to it's a culture.
It's a culture largely in organized sports,
Yeah.
football, but like where, when you look through, honestly, when you start looking at student organizations, you have to be vigilant and wondering, is hazing a part of this? And we're talking about fraternities, sororities. We're talking about programs, whether they're athletic or scholastic in nature. You have to be looking out for students and sort of doing your due diligence, because if not, you see this sort of can fester for years and years and become sort of just a cultural norm.
I spoke with Cam Buckner. He's been working on an athlete bill of rights,
Yep.
and he is now re-examining that bill of rights. Hazing is already illegal in the state of Illinois, but he wants to make sure that that athlete bill of rights, student athlete bill of rights, has in it protections and resources to handle things like what we're seeing at Northwestern, because it's believed that this could be happening at other schools as well.
For
We
sure.
really don't want it to be. It's one thing to be carrying pads for senior members of a football team down a football field, right? That's what I had to do when I played football. It's another thing that we saw described in these reports and in this reporting for those Northwestern students. So there's action that's going to be taken in these coming weeks. It's definitely a fast-moving story that is not over yet. That's for sure.
Mila, recently you wrote a story about how is the city and Chicago Public Schools working to engage students who are either out of work or out of school. Can you break down your reporting for us?
Sure. I started covering education here in Chicago about 5 minutes before the pandemic started. And I kept hearing this 50,000 number, 50,000 teens and young adults who are not going to school and not working, which seemed really striking to me. And I have been wanting to examine that. Obviously, we saw more young people disengage from school and in some cases from society during the pandemic. And I really wanted to look at some of the efforts here locally to try to get them back, bring them back. I'm hearing from advocates that in many other places, we didn't necessarily see the new urgency and new energy around addressing this issue that folks expected would come on the heels of COVID. But here in Chicago, there was some new movement on this issue. So I took a closer look at these programs. Some of them seem promising. The district is throwing a lot of resources at this new program. Overall, I feel that, and smart people I talked to said that what we've seen in the city is a patchwork of usually small-scale, fragmented programs without a whole lot of coordination between the various nonprofits and public agencies that are doing work in that space. And it's really hard to come by any sort of data on what the outcomes for young people that have been touched by these programs are. Are they getting back to school? Are they finishing their education? Are they getting jobs? We don't know that usually.
Like you said, during the pandemic, I do feel like so much focus was how do we get students to either, get on your Zoom every day, or how do we slowly get them back into classrooms? But when you talk about people who disengage, whether it's from school or the workforce, it feels like the attention has been more sparse. Why is it so important to focus on these 45,000 to 50,000 young people? What is the city and CPS saying is the benefit of re-engaging students?
The fallout from young people disengaging from school and work, even for a fairly brief stretch, is enormous. This is something that folks at universities and think tanks have studied over the years, especially over the past decades. And what they have found is that clearly there's a toll on these young people's ability to come out of poverty and on their earnings, right? But there's also really a toll on things like physical health, social, emotional development, relationships, long term. Then, of course, we know that even though young people here and in other cities disengage for a wide variety of reasons, it's a very complex issue, there is a link between gun violence and disengagement. The University of Chicago has found that 90% or more of young victims of gun violence here in the city are kids who have disengaged from school.
I mean, obviously there's a sort of real toll that many of these young people are facing, real challenges that they're trying to move past. And in a city and a narrative in which they are often, because of these links, scapegoated for the ills that Chicago face, right? It's so easy if something is going wrong in the city to look at young people and to blame them. But as you have conversations with people who are trying to either re-engage, trying to find their way towards work or school, what are they saying they need either from programs or for the city to kind of move through these challenges?
What's really clear is that, yes, first of all, it's completely a misconception that every one of those 45,000 young people is disengaged because they're involved with a gang or because they're involved in criminal activity. The reasons are really complex and really, I think at the end of the day, come down to lack of opportunity in big swaths of the city. I talked to one young man who had just completed his GED with help from a program that called Reconnection Hubs that tries to re-engage young people in Little Village. He was still feeling like he wasn't sure what his next steps might be. And in a moment when he should have had this surge of confidence because he had gotten over this hurdle, he was really feeling the way in which mental health and just lack of training and sense of purpose were still kicking in for him.
What's up, Chicago? Jacoby here. On this podcast, as you know, we work hard to bring you the most important and entertaining conversations happening around our city. But that's not all we do. We also have a daily newsletter that brings you so much more. Our free daily newsletter, Hey Chicago, is written and curated by Sydney Madden. You may have heard her behind the mic a couple of times. My mom can't stop talking about her. The Hey Chicago newsletter is your daily toolkit for being a more informed and engaged citizen of Chicago. It's packed with recommendations, tips, and secrets for seizing everything that Chicago has to offer. You can subscribe to Hey Chicago at chicago.citycast.fm/newsletter. Brandon, I want to move to you. After months of what felt like little to zero rain, we have seen record level rainfall across the Chicagoland area. But it isn't just sort of the rainfall that we're talking about, but the aftermath, and the West Side really has been hit by this. Catch us up.
Yeah, man, it's really exposing some infrastructure issues within the city, especially on the west side. You got people on the west side still dealing with the impacts of that historic rainfall we saw on July 1st and 2nd. It was record-breaking storms. We saw up to 9 inches, flash flood warnings, not just the west side, but also the west suburbs. Numerous people are still without water heaters, they're without air conditioning. Um, Many people have lost their possessions, experienced lots of damage to their homes. LaShawn K. Ford, he is currently working to try to activate different funds, all the funds that can be activated. Governor J.B. Pritzker, he put forward a disaster proclamation to free up more local and state resources. And Tony Preckwinkle's office, Cook County, also doing the same thing, declaring that emergency proclamation as well to get those funds freed up. But these people are still dealing with a lot of major issues here. And so what I did was I was able to talk with this group called the West Side Health Authority. We're actually going to
Mm-hmm.
be having them on our next episode of On the Block, airing tonight on WCIU. But the biggest thing they've said is they need help. They need
Yeah.
volunteers. They need people to help them help others. And so anyone that can step up and be there for their fellow Chicagoans, you're encouraged to reach out to the West Side Health Authority. Really good people over there who are trying to fill these gaps that have really been just long left there by
Mm-hmm.
decades of disinvestment, right? It's a story we talked about numerous times and something that Mayor Brandon Johnson ran on. We're seeing it play out as we're dealing with a climate crisis and all kinds of weather issues going on right now. This flooding is still creating some major problems for Westsiders.
Yeah, I read a quote from Representative Ford that said nearly 25% of homes in Austin reported flooding
Yeah.
throughout this rainfall. And what I think is really concerning, especially when we start talking about environmental justice and the climate crisis, is, just earlier this week, we had those tornado warnings, right? And those sirens go off and you see the sort of wind forming. And because they have these sort of clear impacts on communities and lives lost, they sort of garner more attention. When you think about the wildfires, the amount of attention. But when we start talking about things like the hottest neighborhoods in Chicago, when we start talking about the neighborhoods that are more susceptible to flooding, we stop paying attention as much. But as somebody who's lived in a home that experienced waist-high flooding when I was in high school, right, it's more than when the water recedes. That has an impact on your health because of the type of water that's being backed up into your home. Has an impact on your property long term. And also on your family possessions. We lost tons of family photos, tons of family books, heirlooms, because our house flooded. And again, like you said, this is an infrastructure issue. This is something that's going to take commitment. It's going to take investment. It's going to take political will, especially as we continue to deal with sort of these unpredictable weather patterns. And so again, the cost that families and communities are having to take on because of this. And so hopefully the disaster proclamation allows for more local and state resources to flow directly to people. Hopefully coordination with FEMA will allow people to access resources as well.
I'm glad you brought up the costs because it does rack up. My mom has dealt
Mm-hmm.
with a lot of flooding in her home. My grandma's dealt with a lot of flooding in her home, and those bills are no joke. You
No.
got to no joke at all, and the damage it causes to everything. I just feel for everybody out there on the west side. So yeah, if you can help out, please do so.
The weather is expected to continue to be unpredictable this weekend, so you might be seeing some flash flood warnings, some tornado warnings. Lakeshore Drive had an entire lane shut out earlier this week because of rain. We've seen cars caught under the Austin overpass, and so continue to remain safe, check the weather, check in on your people as much as you can. Mila, earlier in the podcast, you were talking about the city trying to re-engage students who are either disconnected from school or work, but there's another vulnerable population of young people moving through the city of Chicago, and we're talking about the thousands of migrants, asylum seekers, refugees, and as we're moving back towards the start of the school year, you are doing some reporting on how is the city and CPS working to engage refugee students. Can you talk a little bit about it?
Sure. As you know, the issue of migrants arriving in Chicago and the city's efforts to grapple with housing and other aspects of welcoming these new arrivals has gotten a lot of attention, especially the past couple of years with allegations coming out about sexual misconduct by police officers at stations where some of these migrant families are housed. What I feel is a piece of the story that hasn't gotten a lot of coverage is how schools are working to serve this influx of migrant students. We had a story by freelance writer Crystal Paul earlier this week about some teachers who are volunteering to work with students in a police station in Morgan Park. But overall, I think it's been hard to even get a specific number from the school district and the city on how many students we're talking about. And we've been hearing maybe for about 2 months now that the district is gearing up to release a more specific plan about how they will serve migrant students going forward. We haven't seen that yet. We've heard a little bit from mayor's office officials that they're looking at maybe opening a welcome center at Clemente High School where students will be able to enroll and the district would figure out the best place for them to go to school. But we're definitely, hopefully, poised to find out more about what the plan is going forward.
Yeah, and it's important for people to remember that we're not just talking about asylum seekers arriving from South and Central America. We've also seen, waves of refugees coming from Afghanistan and Ukraine, parts of Africa as well. And when we talk about the resources needed, particularly for refugee students and asylum seekers. We did an episode, it might be a year and a half ago, with Sullivan High School up in Rogers Park, which has been noted by some, including Arthur Ellie Fishman, as Refugee High, where tons of refugee students find themselves in Chicago. And I think we immediately just think about like language services, but the pressure that refugee students face, they're often in times having to not only take on the task of returning to school, maybe finding work to help out their family, but for so many of them, they end up having to teach the language to their parents, helping their parents transition to America as well. Are we thinking beyond just language services, but also how do we provide more resources when the students leave as well, Mila?
Absolutely. I should really hope that we're thinking about this issue in that more sweeping way. Clearly, meeting the needs of the students goes far beyond providing academics in a language that makes them accessible to them. It also really stretches to addressing some of the trauma that many of these students bring, connecting them and their families to services in their neighborhoods and in the city at large that their families need to stay afloat. So it really needs to be there needs to be a thoughtful plan that takes into account these complex needs. And I know there's been, over this past year, there's been this tension in the district between enrolling these students in schools that are close to where they're housed versus maybe looking at schools that might be better equipped to meet some of their language and other needs. I know there was some good reporting from WBZ earlier this spring looking at, among other things, how some bilingual programs in the city that have really seen their enrollments plummet during the pandemic are saying, we're in really good shape to serve some of those students. Please send them to us. We're ready for them.
Every single episode of CityCast Chicago ends with a pitch to the newsletter, because I think Hey Chicago is the best damn newsletter in the city. We talking latest in news, events, breakdowns, but each episode also ends with some good news. All right, this could be personal, professional, an event you're looking forward to, something to help CityCast listening get through the next hour, the next day, the weekend. And Pope, I'm going to start with you. What is your some good news?
All right, let me see if I can try it. Some good news.
Oh, you went with the crooner effect.
You know,
I see you. A little different vibe to it.
Yeah. I still got to wake the voice up a little bit. But hey, here's what I'm pumped about. I'm a kid at heart. We all know I'm just a giant kid. There is this Lego store at Water Tower Place. They got a pop-up that's going to have Lego brick burgers, bruh. It's going to be square burgers with buns that are Lego bricks. Mm-hmm. Green, yellow, red. They look so cool. I know y'all just hearing this, but I want you to go on the Block Club Chicago website and look up these Lego brick burgers.
I'll drop a link for the people.
Now here's the thing. I'm gonna be real with y'all. They cost a lot. Okay, it's gonna look cute on Instagram, but it's going to cost you $47 for this burger.
You can save for a couple of months. It's not coming until, I think, September 23rd, 24th. So you got a little bit of time.
Yeah, get your summer spending done and then save a little bit, because that brick burger coming through, and it looks hearty. It looks thick.
I feel that's a big thick with a Q. $47 is ridiculous. It better come with a wine pairing. With that being said, it is more than the food. The entire pop-up, and shout out to the Water Tower, because they've been losing stores in there, since been losing. But the pop-ups, the interactive pop-ups, whether it was the Harry Potter exhibit that was in there for so long or the Lego-inspired brick burger, I appreciate how they're using that space. And if you go, like you said, it'll be Instagrammable. You're paying the $47 for the food, but you're also paying for the ambiance, the sort of Lego couches and all of the decor on the wall. Moving from brick burgers at Water Tower to a fun new festival that's coming to South Shore. Mila, what is your some good news?
My good news extends this kid at heart theme that Brandon started. However, unlike his thing, mine is free. I will not be crooning about it.
You're not gonna say, you're not gonna give me. I thought I was gonna get a good news out of you.
No, no matter what I do to wake up my voice, there's no crooning coming out of me. So, and credit to my colleague Maxwell Evans at Block Club for writing about this event that's coming up on
Max
Saturday. It's the Double Dutch Fest at Rainbow Beach in South Shore from 11 to 3 on Saturday. And what I love about this event, other than it being free, is that besides getting a chance to reconnect with your kid's self and try to get back into the rope jumping game, and also see some professional groups do their thing, including breakdancing and stuff like that. The event is also really geared around getting folks to appreciate the beauty and the ecological importance of Rainbow Beach. It's a top nesting spot for piping plovers. So as part of the event, there will be some information on how neighbors and other folks locally are trying to preserve the dunes and some of the plants and animals out there. And there'll also be a beach cleanup at the end of the event on Saturday.
Hey.
So how cool is that?
That actually sounds awesome.
I am from the era where recess was just held on a sort of glass-filled concrete parking lot, and Double Dutch was a huge part of that time. I'm not gonna lie, I tried a few times. I got the whiplash to prove it, but I gotta ask, Mila, you talk about getting back into the Double Dutch game. Was you ever in the Double Dutch game?
I was not in the game per se, but
Coach,
we
put me
actually. But it was something that I did do growing up in Sofia, Bulgaria, in one of those concrete Soviet-era neighborhoods on the outskirts of the city, just a few years ago, let's say.
I
I'm just
appreciate
kidding.
the visuals.
It's been a minute. I am definitely out of rope jumping shape. But maybe a chance to get back into it.
Exactly. You'll be there. 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. tomorrow at Rainbow Beach. We'll drop more information in the show notes. You can get out there. There will be food, giveaways, and you can watch people doing flips and all kinds of tricks inside the Double Dutch. But please stand back, right? Please stand back so you don't end up like me. Speaking of sort of bringing a weekend event together with a educational opportunity, some good news for the people is a 2-day event that's happening starting tonight at the Epiphany Center for the Arts. It's called Art Guaranteed. A new podcast is being released by friends over at Respair featuring the one and only Dr. Eve Ewing. And they're going to be at the Epiphany Hall tonight on the near west side, West Loop part of the town to talk about this new podcast that is really a look at the guaranteed income pilot programs that we're seeing take place in Chicago and Cook County to talk about what happens when you give people direct cash solutions. How does it impact their life? How does that money make a difference for their family and their community? I'm really excited to hear this podcast. And then on Saturday, from 1 to 5 p.m. They're going to be having an art showcase to continue this conversation. But people can come out, kids and family. They're going to have food, games. It's an entire weekend called Art Guarantee. It is free, but you need to register at a link I will make available in the show notes through Eventbrite. And I will be there tonight to support the homies. Again, I want to give a huge thank you to our guest today from WCIU TV and from 1,000 other places in the city. The one and only host and old head Brandon Pope, and joining us from Chalk Beach, Chicago for the first time, but definitely not the last time, reporter Mila Kumpalova. Thank y'all both so much for making time this morning.
Great to be here, bro. Thank you.
Sounds great.
Before I let you go, I got to give a huge shout out to the people who make CityCast Chicago possible. That's lead producer Simone Alisea, our newsletter editor Sydney Madden, producers this week are Grant Irving and Noah Snyderman. Our roving newsletter editor is Natalia Aldana, and the music we all love to listen to is from the one and only Sam Thousand, all the kimonos, and Mark Greenberg from the Mayfair Workshop. I mentioned the best damn newsletter in the city, which is Hey Chicago. Sign up at chicago.citycast.fm and share with your friends and family. You could join us back here Monday when we're breaking down the finalists for Chicago Police Superintendent, who were just announced last night. Make sure you subscribe to learn more about the decision now facing Mayor Brandon Johnson. My last thank you is for you. I'll talk to you on Monday. Peace. I have to say this one thing because it's been on my mind the whole conversation. The way you're sitting, Mila, and because of Pope's couch, it looks like you're popping out from behind his shoulder. I took a screenshot that I'm going to email everybody, but it looks like the whole time you were just like, yeah, I'm with that. That makes sense. We're talking about children. It's a hilarious view.
Oh, I love that.
That is totally my vibe. Yeah, I'm like, I gotta try to do a little bit of what Brandon does, and I'm gonna be okay.